Now you can send your ZBrush meshes into Substance Painter with a single click. All you need to do is go to ZBrush, open up the texture palette, and then you'll find the Substance Bridge in there. And I have a few settings here already selected. I'm gonna click on Send to Painter and let this do its thing. And as you can see, this whole process is automatic. It does the baking for you, and now you have the asset inside Substance Painter ready to texture. Hey, what's up guys, Paulo Munoz here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the ZBrush to Substance Painter plugin and a few things that you need to consider to make the most out of this brand new plugin. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Alright, so as I showed you at the beginning of the video, the steps to send things to Substance Painter are actually really simple. You just need to have a mesh inside ZBrush, then you just need to click on the texture palette and open up the Substance Bridge and click Send to Painter, and then everything is automatic, right? But there are a few things that is important to know and to understand so that what you get in Substance is what you're expecting. So let's go ahead and open up the left tray, and I'm going to click on the texture palette and this dot here to drag it in there, just because this is where the new plugin lives, so the Substance Painter Bridge. All right, so a few things that you need to know about this asset and basically what you need to consider for your own assets. So this has two subtools. So I have the base and I have the helmet. So I'm going to go into solo mode. This is the base and this is the helmet. Now, both of these subtools have subdivision levels. So if I go to all low, you'll see I have a fairly low res mesh for both, right? And both of them have subdivision levels. So the base has 4 subdivision levels and the helmet has 5 subdivision levels, okay? And obviously in the high subdivision level is where I added all the details and the wear and tear and all the stuff that makes this, let's say, more realistic. And that is the idea, that you work on the high subdivision level, but you have the low res that you can send to Painter so that you can texture. That's the basis of it, and that's usually how the workflow goes. All right, so you have your assets and you have subdivision level. Now, the most important thing to clarify is that when you think about Substance Painter, you always think about low-res meshes that have UV maps already. Now, for this asset, if I go into the lowest subdivision level and I click on Morph UV, you'll see that I already have UVs for this character. So that is great. And I created these UVs using a dedicated tool that I use called Rhizome UV. And I do the same thing for the base. So the base also has UVs, right? However, if you don't have UVs or if you don't want to go through the process of creating UVs, this new plugin also allows you to send something that has no UVs and it will automatically unwrap it for you, okay? So that's what this setting is here. And I'm just going to mention this first because that's kind of like the first misconception, that you have to have UVs, right? So if you click on Force UV Auto Unwrap and you have no UVs in your models, then Substance Painter is going to use its own algorithm to create the UV unwrap and give you the result, basically. So you don't have to do anything. Everything is automated. I would personally suggest not to do that because having control of the UVs will simplify your texturing workflow a lot more. So personally, I don't like to use this one. If anything, if you don't want to go through the process of UVing things manually, you can use the Z plugin, go to the UV master and unwrap your models from here, and that's it. The only scenario that I would recommend that you keep this Force UV wrap is when you have multiple pieces and maybe you forgot to unwrap a tiny little piece, and that will give you an error because it won't load. But if you leave the Force UV auto unwrap, it will use the UVs, but it will auto unwrap anything that doesn't have UVs. So it's kind of like quality of life. But in general, and if you're following this workflow, you don't need to have this on. Just, I want to clarify that it is there, so you don't have to have UVs. It's better to have it so that you have more control over your textures, but you don't have to have it. The option is there. All right, so in terms of the settings, it's actually really simple. The all just means whatever you have here. I'm just going to maybe add, I don't know, a gear here, and I'm going to turn it off. So if I click all, it's going to send everything, whether it's visible or not. The visible, obviously, is going to send only the visible part. So in my case, just the helmet and the base, not that gear. And the active is going to send only the subtool that you have selected. So in my case, if I just select the helmet and go into solo mode, I know for sure that this is the one that is going to be sent, right? If I leave this as active. So in my case, I'm just going to leave this as visible, just to show you that only these two that are visible are going to be sent. I don't have polypaint, but you could have polypaint. So if you have polypaint and you spend time polypainting this, you can click on Send Polypaint, and ZBrush is going to send that. The polypaint is going to convert it into a texture map. That's why you need UVs in this case. And Substance Painter is going to read it as a normal albedo or diffuse map. That's it. And because I don't have it, I'm just going to turn that off. The smooth normals is important, so you have a nice, smooth of the normals. Otherwise, you see the faceted polygons when you have a low-res mesh like this. The auto baking is one of the best things that you can do in this new workflow because you don't have to spend time baking things. I'm going to show you both anyway, but the let's say the most ideal workflow would be to leave this in auto bake so that it happens automatically. And then you have two more options. You have subdivision level, you have current, and low and high. So the current means that you can send maybe something like this, like 4 subdivision levels, which is currently almost 1 million polygons. That should be fine in Painter, depending on your computer, but it should be fine. So that means if you click on current, it's gonna send this resolution or this amount of subdivision into Painter as a mesh. But again, the most streamlined workflow would be to have the low res and the high res so that you can have millions of polygons in the high res, and in the low res, you can send it to Painter and work a bit more efficiently. So low to high is the ideal scenario here. It's gonna send both the low res and the high res. That's why I highlighted earlier on that I have subdivision levels. So it's gonna have the lowest and the highest subdivision level to do the baking. And in the texture set, this is actually very important. You have a per subtool and you have a per polygroup texture set. Texture set are basically the different groups of layers or textures that you have in Substance Painter. And the difference is that in my case, I have 2 subtools. So I'm gonna end up with 2 texture sets. So 2 different independent resolutions. I could have 8K on this helmet and then maybe 2K on this base. That is totally doable by using the per subtool. If you want, you can go for per polygroup, which in this case, if I don't have any, but I could do that really quickly just to show you. I'm gonna click on auto groups, and I have actually 3 different pieces or 4 different pieces for this helmet, right? So because each one of these is a different polygroup or a different polygon ID, Substance Painter is gonna treat it as a different texture set. So this would be kind of like the equivalent if you wanna do UDIMs in a way. So it's not exactly that, but it could work like that. So for instance, if I hide this, maybe half of it, and then just give it a polygroup, something like that, right? I could say to ZBrush, hey, send this to Painter, and each polygroup will become its own texture set. So I can have 8K resolution on one side, on this polygroup, and 8K resolution on another side. So there will be 2 different texture sets. In this case, again, we're gonna keep it super simple. Just wanna show you that the option is there, and it's great to have it inside this plugin. So we're gonna keep it super simple. We're gonna click on Per Subtools. So we end up with 2 texture sets, one for the base and one for the helmet. That's it. There is nothing else I need to do. I can have this in all high, or I can have this, in solo, perspective. It doesn't really matter how you have it in here, as long as the subdivision levels are there. I'm gonna click on Send to Painter, and I'm not touching anything else. Everything that is happening right now, it is happening behind the scenes. I have Substance Painter on. Let's go ahead and open up here. There you go. So this is Substance Painter. I had it open before because that's how I was working, but you don't have to. If you don't have Substance Painter on, it will load it automatically. And there you go. As you can see, it is sending everything from ZBrush. It is doing the baking automatically. I haven't touched the keyboard or anything. This is done all automatically, right? So that's it. I'm not gonna touch anything else. I'll come back and explain things in just a bit, but I'm gonna click on Return to Painting. There you go. So now we have everything that we had in ZBrush. We had all those nice details that we created in ZBrush, and we have the texture sets. So let's go ahead and compare what we sent from ZBrush into Painter so that you understand the difference. So in ZBrush, we have the 2 subtools, and we send this to low and high, and we send this as per tool, or like the texture set was sent as per tool. So now in the texture set list, we now have 2. We have the base and we have the helmet. You can hold the Alt Q, which is the shortcut to isolate one. And there you go. So we can have the base and we have the helmet. This is perfect. You can start texturing things right now. In fact, I'm just going to drop in a texture here and then maybe scale it a tiny bit more. And let's go ahead and add a metal. And there you go. We have the metal. And of course, the rest is just about texturing this asset. But it is already working there. It is already using the mesh maps that were created during the baking process that is automatic to use some of the generators. So let me just show you something because it's really simple. I'm gonna add a new layer here. I'm gonna do rough and metal. And I'm gonna make this really, really obvious, just a green color. And I'm gonna give it a black mask. And in that black mask, I'm gonna add a generator. So this generator is going to, I'm gonna choose the dirt generator. And this generator is going to use some of the mesh maps that were created during that baking process. That's why it's important to have those mesh maps. And now we can control the contrast of that dirt, the reach or how much is it spreading, and it's using the curvature, the ambient occlusion, the world space normal, the position, all of that to apply that. And once you have that, because this is non-destructive, you can just go ahead and maybe make it like a dull gray or something, and it's just some dust collected in there. But the point is that with a single click, with some options that you choose from ZBrush, you end up with something that you can start texturing straight away, and it looks great. Now let's go back quickly to the baking options because it is important to highlight a couple of things. So I'm gonna go to the texture set settings and I'm gonna click on Bake Mesh Maps. Now, Bake Mesh Maps allows you to rebake things or fix things if you wanted to. Again, it does a pretty good job by default, but the default one is 240K, right? So if you want to bake your mesh maps at a high resolution, this is important. So I'm gonna do it at 4K, right? And to be honest, I usually don't go 4K for things like the position or the world space normal. I usually go for high resolution for maps that require more accuracy in, or quality in the resolution. So the normal map, potentially the ambient occlusion is not something that it requires that much, but the curvature potentially as well. So, and I'm just highlighting this because if you want to have higher mesh maps, you need to change it again here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select this to 4K and I'm going to click on Bake Mesh. Now, while this is baking, again, it's a process that happens, pretty quickly. I just want to show you that in this area that says high poly parameters, this is where it created the high resolution mesh, and it sort of exported that high resolution mesh in the process, and is now referencing in Substance Painter. So essentially, what happens behind the scenes, so that you understand, is when you click on the low end res, ZBrush is going to send the low resolution of all your meshes that you have visible in this case to Substance Painter. So those are actual geometry that gets sent to Substance Painter. But the high resolution mesh gets exported as a temporary file. That's why it's here in app data, local, temp files, blah, blah, blah. And Substance Painter doesn't have to load millions of polygons. That is the key of this process. It's only referencing that file to do the baking. And all the details that you create in ZBrush then are translated into a mesh map, which is what we have here. So now we finished with the process. As you can see, it's pretty simple. We have now 4K. I'm gonna click on Return to Painting Mode. And we now have some high resolution mesh. Now, by default, because I created the mesh maps, the document size is going to be at 240K. So basically, this UV set is set to 240K, but I can just click this and set it to 4K, right? This is completely independent from the bakes that I did before, but I just wanted to show you in case you need it. Now, there's some like little artifacts here. This is just something to do with the display, really. If you move things around, it will work just fine. And there you have it. The process of sending things from ZBrush to Substance Painter became really easy with this new plugin. It's an official plugin, an official bridge that comes with the latest version of ZBrush 2026.2. And you just update and you get it straight away. Just click on one button and send all your files. This is personally one of the things that I've been looking forward to use the most, because it allows me to streamline my workflow. I don't have to export a bunch of things and deal with multiple files. I just click one button and then I'm already in the texturing environment, which is Substance Painter in my case. And that's it. I just use ZBrush kind of like my Swiss Army knife, right? So from ZBrush, I can send things to Rise on UV. There is a plugin that is free for that as well. And I do all my UVs in there and then send it back to ZBrush. And if I want a texture, then I use the new plugin to send it to Substance Painter. I do the textures there, and so on and so forth. So it becomes a very simple and very straightforward process to sculpt in ZBrush, create your character, creatures, assets, whatever you're doing. Click one button and texture them in Substance Painter. And the texturing process is actually really simple when you break it down to the smaller parts. I use a bunch of fill layers with, custom masks just to drive the variation in the color, in the roughness, and also exactly where I want to have certain things. And this process of texturing this helmet with this sort of metal material took about 25 minutes, half an hour, just setting everything up so that it's non-destructive and I can go back and change it, reduce the height information, or reduce the dirt, or reduce the damage, all of those things. But ultimately, it's a bunch of very simple layers, each one of those layers doing a very specific thing, whether it's adding contrast or changing, adding color variation, changing the metalness, all of that in a single material. And if this feels a little bit abstract and maybe you're new to Substance Painter and you wanna cover all the basics first and all the fundamentals, I have a course online called the Substance Painter 1-on-1 or SP 1-on-1, and it's a dedicated beginner's course that covers everything that you need to do. We have multiple projects focusing on different features and different things that this awesome application allows you to produce, and I cover absolutely everything from scratch. So you don't need to know absolutely anything about the software or the concept of texturing. I cover everything from scratch, and then you'll have the full confidence to texture your own assets. So if you're interested in the SP 1-on-1, go ahead and check it out in the Pablander Academy, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.